A lot of people who know me in the slightest know that I'm a pretty big fan of the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, or more so of the Persona Spinoff series to be honest. The only non-Persona SMT game I've played is Nocturne, which is pretty good by the way, but I'd really like to give the others a shot one day when I have the consoles to play them on because all my homies hate emulation. I got into the franchise of Persona 5 back in November of 2019 like a lot of people, and the Royal version is one of my favorite games of all time, heck it may even be my favorite. I've played through Persona 3 Portable and have FPS on my PS2, and I'm still playing through Persona 4 Golden on Steam, and yeah I know I really want to finish it, but I have a lot of other games on my plate. To be honest, I didn't really have any expectations going into Strikers. I knew it wasn't turn-based obviously, but I tried to stay as blind as possible, avoiding any gameplay or reviews from the people who play the Japanese version. I do remember playing the demo on my Japanese PS4 account a year or so ago before the Western release, but then kind of forgot all about it, and it took literally 9 months to just announce the game was coming to the West when the full Japanese version came out in February 2020. Speaking of which, the Digital Deluxe Edition literally launched exactly 1 year after the Japanese launch, which like, Atlas, is it that hard to localize a game? I mean, it only took 6 months to translate Persona 5, which has like way more dialogue to be translated than Strikers. Plus, they had to get a lot more new voice actors for Persona 5, but okay. At least we actually have English voices, but let's be real here, that's like the bare minimum. Now, after putting over, damn, 100 hours into this game, I can see that Persona 5 Strikers is definitely a worthy sequel to Persona 5. It should not be regarded as just a spin-off. Find out why as I go into an in-depth review of Persona 5 Strikers, the sequel to my favorite game ever, and see if it's worthy of that title. Oh, and before you idiots start saying, why aren't you reviewing Persona 5 or the other Persona games first? The story takes place a few months after the ending of Persona 5 and not Persona 5 Royal, so that means Maruki and Kasumi do not exist.
What? No, dude!
I'm obviously not going over the events of P5 since that game's a sequel, so you should all be familiar with it. If not, get your ass out of this video. Joker and Morgana return back to Young Jai to reunite with the Phantom Thieves after not seeing each other since the last game. During their reunion, they decided they're going on a camping trip for their summer vacation, and Futaba also introduces everyone to the hot new virtual assistant app called Emma. Think of Siri, but way more convenient, and also fucking evil. The next day, while Joker and Best Boy are shopping for supplies, they discover that the Emma app is actually connected to the metaverse somehow. They find out about this after a famous fashion designer, Alice Hiragi, gives a few of her fans at an event a keyword for them to add her as a friend on the Emma app. However, she doesn't have a traditional palace from the last game, but rather something new called a jail, with Alice being the ruler of said jail, or monarch as they are called. I'm not gonna lie, I thought these jails are just gonna be a dollar store version of palaces, but no, they're actually really different. Basically, rather than focusing on the monarch's distorted cognition of the world, the jail instead focuses mostly on the monarch themselves and their past trauma. If a monarch gives someone their keyword to be added as a friend on the Emma app, they're brought to their jail, and in this jail, the monarch has the ability to seize their desires. Once their desires have been stolen, or they are, I'm a fucking idiot, I wrote that in the script, they'll basically become brainwashed to completely obsess over them, even to the point of physically assaulting critics of them as well as going broke to buy any of their products. Of course, the same thing is going on with Alice as well. Her fans are completely obsessed with her, and a man whose desires she stole even confesses to her live on TV in front of his own fiance. Thanks to the intel from Zenkichi Asagawa, a police inspector who struck a deal with the Phantom Thieves, they learn that this change of heart epidemic is happening all over the country. And not only that, but the Phantom Thieves are the ones taking the blame for all of it. So after changing Alice's heart and taking back all the stolen desires, the Phantom Thieves travel across the country visiting different cities that have jails thanks to Sophia's ability to sniff out the location of jails, to not only clear their own name but to change the monarch's hearts because, you know, that's what they do. For about half of the game, it follows a pretty episodic format. The Phantom Thieves visit a new city in Japan, discover there's a jail nearby thanks to Sophia, learn more about the monarch, eventually get their keyword and go into the metaverse to take back the desires, as well as sprinkling in some plot details that become important later on. Fortunately though, after the third jail, they spice things up a lot and it gets really good. But before we cover the rest of the story, let's discuss the presentation of Persona 5 Strikers. What, did you think I was gonna say gameplay? The original Persona 5 sure as hell had style, and that's a literal fact. Every little part of the UI in Persona 5 was just such eye candy to look at. Like all of the shops have their own stylish menus that also represent part of their character. Even just something as simple as selecting a Persona skill is a load of fun because of the UI. And the menu screen is just brilliant. I love all the patterns you have here and how it only uses 3 colors, not only making everything pop out, but just look really cool. Like, I don't even have to put into words how good this looks because you can just see it for yourself. Now let's look at the menu in Strikers. Wait a minute, is there shit on my screen? Wait, shit, that's the actual fucking menu. Okay, I'm probably sounding really petty saying this, but this menu here is just too mediocre for Persona 5 standard. It isn't terrible, it's still perfectly functional, but it feels like Koei Tecmo wanted to incorporate the Persona 5 style, but they just didn't try in the slightest. I'm not much of a fan of how the text looks. Like, what the fuck is this pirate-looking font? What is pretty interesting about it is how each different section has a Phantom Thief that Joker moves towards, but let's be honest here, just how it was handled in Persona 5 was infinitely better. There are some menus I do actually like, though. I thought Joker's Kitchen and Sophia's shop actually look really nice, but the rest was just This is extremely nitpicky, I know, but it doesn't really affect my enjoyment of Strikers at all. I just wanted to point it out. Like any other game, I wouldn't be complaining at all, but coming from P5, this is just such a downgrade. Also, the game looks pretty funky, specifically the character models. Like now they have this outline, which looks really raggedy, so you can almost always see the pixels and stuff. I don't know, I'm not really good at describing stuff, but it looks weird. Once again, Persona 5 just looked a lot better. It's hard to describe the art style. I guess it's kind of cel-shaded, but still it looks way better. Now, these are really minor nitpicks. I just wanted to point these out since I haven't really heard anyone else talk about them. But remember, they seriously don't make the game worse for me or anything. I just think they could have been better. The main two reasons I see people regard Strikers as a spin-off is because 1, all of the social simulator elements are not present in this game, but let's be honest, the structure of the story basically makes them impossible. And 2, the combat system isn't turn-based like the rest of the Persona series. Instead, we have combat that is very similar to Musou games, akin to games such as Dynasty Warriors and pretty much any other game with the name Warriors in the title. To get this out there, I just want to say that I don't have any prior experience with Warriors games, so don't expect me to be comparing this game to like Hyrule Warriors or anything. Something that I was concerned about going into Strikers was whether or not P5's turn-based combat system would translate well or at all into this new, more action-packed approach. But to my surprise, it still felt quite a lot like a Persona game. All your characters both have a normal attack and a special attack. You can combine these two buttons in specific combinations to rack up more combos and deal more damage. What's great about Strikers is the fact that every single character plays differently with their special attack. In fact, you get access to 8 out of the total 9 playable characters within the first 3 hours of the game. Let's run down all the playable characters and their unique abilities. Ryuji can become a hard to stagger tank who can charge combo finishers to deal massive damage. And what's even cooler is that you can charge the combos that can summon your persona. Because of these reasons, Ryuji uses him at party very often because of how useful this ability is, as well as the fact he can also charge up his gun attacks. Morgana can transform into a car and ram into enemies, but to be honest, it really isn't that great. But his persona skills still make him an all-around good party member. On and Makoto both share the ability to enchant their weapons with fire and nuclear damage respectively, making them a really good choice for enemies who are weak against that stuff. Out of the two, I can definitely say I prefer Makoto, since On's whip doesn't do much damage, and it may sound real petty saying this, but beating up a bunch of enemies with her whip never felt very satisfying like most of their characters. However, her gun is really good. Makoto packs a lot more of a punch, and some of her skills can even let you take Johanna for a ride. Yusuke can chop up enemies with a sword like a hibachi chef that not only looks badass but can do a lot of damage, since he can rapidly press buttons to extend the combo. Combine this with the fact that he has ice skills plus lots of super strong physical attacks that can be great for technical damage with freezing enemies. Yusuke was definitely one of my favorite party members. Haru has the ability to extend all of her combos by holding on the special attack button at the end, making her really satisfying to play when you're able to completely just trap an enemy in your combo. That is when it actually works, of course. I don't know if I'm the only one who experienced this, but Haru didn't really feel that responsive a lot of the time when trying to extend combos. Like, I really like all of her combos, but how unresponsive and stiff she can be at times made her not quite reach my favorites. And Sophia specializes in being dog shit. Okay, Sophia's gimmick is that she uses 2 yo-yos to attack enemies, but they don't do much damage. That's because you have to properly time the attack button with when she catches her yo-yos during combos to raise her damage and range for a short period of time to actually make her useful. Now, this doesn't sound too bad at first. It may take a bit of learning to get the hang of it, but what's wrong with that? Well, let me tell you. The main issue isn't even the fact that her playstyle takes practice to get right, actually. It's the fact that literally one of the most defining traits of Musou games is that there are always huge amounts of enemies you have to beat up. And because of that, it's really hard to actually focus on when she catches her yo-yos to time it. So because of that, I don't use Sophia that much, honestly. Usually only when I need bless damage. Oh yeah, she does specialize in bless damage as well as healing spells, so she isn't really useless, but that's mostly just what I use her for. Lastly, we have Zenkichi, who you don't unlock until the 5th dungeon, and guess what? Zenkichi is cool! He uses his really big sword as well as revolvers to attack enemies. How can you tell me this isn't just badass? Zenkichi's gimmick is that by pressing the special button, he can activate Fury mode, which allows him to do more damage but slowly lose health. To counter this, his gun can restore little bits of health and his combos can as well, which is really awesome since they're already pretty strong. On top of all this, his persona is neutral to all elements and specializes in buffs, physical gun skills, and almighty damage. Zenkichi rarely left my party after I unlocked him. It was probably my favorite to play as. The large amount of characters to play as definitely made the game feel fresh, and I was always swapping between characters, but I didn't play them all equally, to be honest. I probably gave Yusuke, Ryuji, Makoto, and Zenkichi the most attention since I enjoyed their playstyles the most. In my opinion, the combat system does feel like the turn-based one we see in Persona 5 brought over to a warrior-style game. Persona skills and now freeze time, giving you all the time in the world to choose your skills. And this time, instead of just automatically targeting one area, all enemies within the attack's area will be affected by it, making magic spells great for crowd control. I really think this does feel like a proper translation of the turn-based combat. Having to make sure enemies are within the spell's radius adds a new layer of strategy to it. They also incorporated the one more system into Strikers, however, it does work differently. Almost every enemy has a weakness, obviously, and by striking that weakness, it can deplete one of these icons on their stagger meter. And once all the shields are gone, you can perform an all-out attack to do a lot of damage. My only issue with the stagger meter was that I've had a few times where after depleting all the foe's icons, it didn't let enemy do an all-out attack, and it was never clear why that was. Instead, they would all come back, which considering how this only happened to me in boss fights, it didn't make me very happy. The showtimes from Royal are back, however, they're a lot more different. This time, they're just really powerful attacks you get from actually building up a gauge, rather than it just happening because the game felt like it. And I won't lie, it was kind of a letdown how they aren't these super cool, wacky cutscenes involving two characters. The showtimes only focus on one character here. The combat doesn't really get more advanced past the introduction like some other games, but you do have a lot of tools to play with in combat, so I never felt bored while playing this game. The only real way the game evolves in combat is with the Master Arts system. By controlling a character for long enough, you can learn a total of 4 Master Arts for that character. These are mostly just upgrades to already existing combos, sometimes maybe a completely new one, or other times it will just let you perform a follow-up after a combo. Still, I do think it is a good feature, since it incentivizes playing as different characters to possibly unlock new abilities to make them better. In terms of difficulty in Strikers, I thought the game could actually be quite difficult at times, especially with boss fights. But to be honest, sometimes the game is pretty hard for the wrong reasons. I'm just gonna get to the point, the AI in this game is bad. When you aren't directly controlling a party member, they're controlled by AI, and most of the time it's passable, but sometimes their AI can be really stupid. Like the Koei Tech mode is completely forget to program the AI to actually evade enemy attacks at all, because my party's always running around like dumbasses getting hit, and it can be really frustrating when your team takes a lot of damage because their AI done goofed to is entirely out of your control. But what's weird is that sometimes they can just tank hits, but other times they'll actually take damage. It's so inconsistent, so if you see one of your party members about to get hit, you can't guarantee if they'll take damage or not. Now, I get that it does make sense for them to be able to take damage when controlling them, since let's be honest, they're 100% invulnerable, that would be pretty overpowered, but it still doesn't make it any less frustrating. On the first boss, all my party members ended up dying because their AI was like attracted to the boss or something, and during this point of the game, there aren't any revival items at all, and I didn't have any personas to recarm either, so yeah, you can imagine that it can get really frustrating. It's at its worst in boss fights because of how you actually need to be careful. It got super fucking annoying on the third jail's boss, since it had a gimmick where it could eat one of your party members, making it so you can't use it at all until you guide the boss to the chandelier and make it fall on them. And also, my party members wouldn't try to guide the boss to the chandelier either. Oh, and sometimes the AI suggests using spells at really bad times. Sometimes during attacks where the enemy is invincible, they'll try to follow up with an attack when you can't fucking deal damage to them. And they'll try to use a wide area attack when there's one enemy, so at that point just get closer. I'm not a game designer, I've made this in Game Builder Garage and that's pretty much it, but I think they could have reduced the damage party members take when you aren't controlling them, or make it actually consistent, or you know, just make the AI smart enough to dodge attacks for fuck's sake. So overall, I really enjoyed the combat in this game. At its highest, it was really fun and satisfying getting to plow through hordes of enemies, and at its lowest, it was kind of frustrating. I never got bored of the combat, however, despite the fact it doesn't really innovate past what you have in the first few hours, because there are enough things to do to keep me entertained. I'm not that sure if I enjoy the combat here more than the combat in Persona 5 though. I do think both are really good, but I don't know, I kind of just prefer the turn-based one. I like both of them for pretty different reasons, so it's hard to choose which one's my favorite. Now let's talk about the dungeons themselves, which are called jails here. The actual designs of the jails are all pretty good in my opinion. Visually, I think they all look really cool with a few exceptions, specifically the third one. I don't know, but seeing a snow city just doesn't look that cool, honestly. I like snow-themed levels, just not in RPGs to be honest. Also, why the hell is this dungeon even snow-themed? I don't really think there's an actual explanation as to why. Whatever, at least it gave birth to the He-Horde.
Hee-ho! Hee-ho? Hee-ho!
Hee-ho! Also, the whole blizzard gimmick was kinda annoying. I know the entire point is to limit your vision, but fuck that point. If it's annoying, then it's annoying. Okay, back to the jail designs. The themes of each jail aren't as distinct as the palaces in Persona 5, since in that game, every palace felt drastically different from each other because of how different their cognitions were. Here, most of the jails are just the normal city it takes place in, except it's reskinned to be all about the monarch and their personality, which I thought was cool. For example, in Alice's dungeon, there's a bunch of candy and cutesy stuff because, well, look at her. In Natsume's dungeon, there's lots of fantasy stuff because of his fantasy novel he wrote. Something I realized about Striker's dungeons after my second playthrough is that there are barely any actual puzzles. The biggest puzzle I can really think of are times you have to push a certain amount of things to open up a door, or the game just flicks you off and blocks your path so you have to find another way. Because of the fact they have an actual jump button now, exploration feels a lot better. I'm not sure why, but being able to manually jump over something instead of only being able to in the game felt like it was pretty cool in my opinion. It even allowed for some very light platforming. Oh, and by the way, why the hell can't you move and turn the camera at the same time when we're crawling through a vent? This is mostly just a minor issue since you rarely use vent in this game, but whenever you were in one, it was pretty annoying, honestly. Some of the jails do have gimmicks though, not all of which I was a fan of. The Osaka jail has these turrets you have to avoid, which are fine, but the portals in the Kyoto jail were pretty confusing and made it super annoying to go back for requests. The blizzard stuff in Sapporo, like I said, made it hard to see, and the cranes in Okinawa were super slow and annoying. Plus how small these rooms are make it almost impossible to sneak past enemies. Considering how the jails and Strikers feel a lot more open than the palaces in Persona 5, I thought that they'd maybe even expand upon the stealth in P5, but no, it's actually the other way around. In Persona 5, you could take cover behind almost any wall or other structure, and it was a core part of the gameplay. But in Strikers, it's really inconsistent with what walls you can hide behind. It feels like the only added in cover points is spots where enemies are there so you can ambush them. This isn't a deal breaker for me, but I still thought it was pretty weird, to be honest. In Strikers, you can go to the Velvet Room and fuse your personas, but they made some changes to how it works that I didn't like very much. First of all, the demon negotiation is gone, and instead you gain personas from picking up a mask that has a chance to drop after killing an enemy. I think this is a good method, just having to stop and negotiate with demons would be quite the pace breaker since combat is pretty fast paced in this game. So in the other Persona games, to fuse personas, all you needed was your protagonist to be a high enough level as well as the ingredients to fuse a new one. But for some dumbass reason, now in Strikers, your personas have to be a specific level or higher to fuse. Why? Now to counter this, they introduced this new thing called persona points that you can spend to level up personas. But most of the time, trying to get your persona to a specific level costs a lot of PP. You get PP from collecting new personas as well as erasing new ones to get all the points you spent on it. I ended up just getting rid of my strongest persona to get all the persona points back, then just buy it from the compendium to get the required amount for certain personas, which admittedly cost me a lot of money. And some of the combinations of personas you need are pretty strange. Like, why the hell do I need a level 45 Jack-o'-lantern? He's literally like one of the first personas you get in the game. So why the fuck would I have him at level 45? So yeah, I really don't like this new method of fusing personas. Having to get demons to be a certain level just makes it tedious, to be honest. And once again, it was perfectly fine before, so I have no idea why they would just go and fuck it up. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's good. Persona 5 Strikers also has some side missions for you to do called requests. They aren't like the Mementos mission in PS5 where all you have to do was go change some guy's heart. These are really just side missions. I thought this was a neat idea, especially since they let you revisit jails you already completed, but the execution wasn't the best, to be frank. A lot of these requests just feel monotonous and boring to do, honestly. Some of them are just about killing a certain amount of a specific enemy, sometimes as a certain character by exploiting their weakness, and some are just straight up fetch quests that make you go find an item somewhere. There are also requests that just straight up have you fighting a boss you already did again. Like, I think they're a little stronger, but that's it. They seem pretty lazy to me. I did think the ones where you need to reach a certain area of the map without quick travel were cool though, and they weren't really hard. You can't ambush enemies, but just can't raise the security level. Something about the requests that really pissed me off was the fact that you can only accept and report requests in the hideout. For some reason, you can't do it in the jails themselves, so before going in, you have to carefully choose all the ones you'll be able to do. Since if you forget to accept one, you have to go back to your hideout and accept it. It would be so much easier if you could just go into the jail and look and see what requests you can accept. But no, they had to fuck it up for some reason. Also, I think it would have been a lot more convenient if you could see all your current requests on the side of the screen, so you don't have to constantly pause and go to the request menu to check your objectives or progress. Oh yeah, something I forgot to mention that Strikers adds is the new bond level system. By spending time with the gang or completing side missions, you can earn bond XP. And once you get enough to level up, you can get a certain amount of points that can be spent on a variety of different bond skills, all of which can buff certain abilities, chances for things to occur, increase your stats, etc. I believe these were a replacement for the social link ability since those are absent in this game, and I think they get the job done. Sometimes it can be pretty overwhelming with how many different skills there are, plus the fact you can upgrade already existing skills, but I don't mean that in a negative way. Also, whoever thought the Eternal Bonds achievement was a good idea can go fuck themselves. Before diving into the story and characters, there is one last thing I need to talk about, and that's the banger that is this game's soundtrack. Just like its predecessor, as well as the rest of the entire Megami Tensei franchise, this soundtrack is fucking awesome. There isn't a single, and I mean single, song I dislike here. There are obviously some I prefer over others, but overall it's an amazing soundtrack. It reuses some songs from P5, mostly just for the songs that played during dialogue cutscenes, but there is still a good amount of new songs, both in the overworld and in the metaverse. Something pretty interesting that Strikers does is that it remixes a few songs from P5 into rock songs, and let me tell you, some of these remixes are such a banger. My favorite of them all is probably the one for Rivers in the Desert, especially with the boss it's first used in. However, and this is really nitpicky and isn't a big deal like at all, but sometimes the vocal themes played in certain bosses towards the end of the game just feel wrong. To name a few, the song that plays during the Sophia boss fight in the Jail of the Abyss for some reason is an instrumental version of the Rivers in the Desert Scramble. Like, guys, this isn't even a real boss or anything. You just have to dance around with Sophia for a few minutes until the scripted battle ends. And the song that plays during the part where you're killing all the shadows as Ichinose is doing whatever is Counter-Strike for some reason. Like, don't get me wrong, I fucking love these songs, especially Counter-Strike, but in my opinion, this song just has a lot more value when it's only used for special occasions, which is also what makes the Kanoe boss my favorite in the game, because it's the first time I get to hear such a banger of a song. Also, for the last two jails, it uses Last Surprise Scramble as the main battle theme, which I guess is fair for the mini bosses these jails have since there are quite a few actually, but it goes for the normal encounters too, which feel no different from any other encounter in the rest of the game. Please don't take this as me saying the songs are bad just because they're used in some questionable scenes. No, I fucking love these songs, but I couldn't help but point this out as just a teeny tiny nitpick. Okay, now that I discussed everything I want to about the gameplay, now we can talk about the story. This is your one and only spoiler warning. Beyond this point, I'll be discussing major story spoilers, and the story in this game is some good shit, so I highly recommend you finish the game first before coming back to watch this part. I'll give you a few seconds to click off. Sophia dies! Before I talk about the plot itself, I'd like to discuss the two new party members, Sophia and Zenkichi. We'll start with Sophia since you meet her first. You first meet Sophia in the sewers after getting thrown out by Alice's shadow at the beginning of the game. She doesn't have any memories, and she says her only objective is to be humanity's companion. In the jail, they learn Sophia has some sort of combat capabilities. I mean, what she has is basically a persona, but not really, since all our persona skills have a question mark at the end. I don't know, it's never really clear what it is, but it isn't that relevant either. After they leave Alice's jail for the first time, she materializes in the Joker's phone because she's actually an AI. Due to her combat capabilities, as well as her ability to sniff out jail, she joins the Phantom Thieves, and her codename is Sophie. Okay, let me just go on a little rant here. Why the hell is Sophia's Phantom Thief codename Sophie? Like, that's one letter off, so it kind of defeats the entire purpose of a codename. Like, imagine calling Ryuji Ryoji when he's in the metaverse. It barely makes a fucking difference. Also, Sophia is just an AI. She doesn't even need a codename. Yeah, you can argue the same for Morgana, but I mean, he's Morgana. He's arrogant, plus he's the one who even proposed the idea of codenames to begin with. Okay, back to Sophia. Throughout her trip with the Phantom Thieves, she tries to get an idea of what the human heart is like. Obviously, since she's an AI, these kind of things aren't exactly natural to her. What also helps with her mission to learn about the heart is how the monarchs are a lot more sympathetic, which I'll get into later. So usually after the bosses, Sophia will ask Joker questions about why they did this or that, since she doesn't really understand that kind of stuff. Now, to fans who have played other Persona games, this story may seem pretty familiar. Specifically, I guess from Persona 3. They're both not human and don't understand how being human exactly works, but their arcs are actually very different from each other once you look past the surface. I found that Sophia's arc is about breaking free from being a doll waiting for commands to someone with real feelings and emotion, and Aikis's arc focuses on her finding the meaning of life and why people die, all that stuff. Really, the main difference between the two is just the themes of Persona 3 and 5 being quite different, with 3 focusing on the meaning of life and death and why it's important, and 5 is about rebelling against the unfair reality of this world and just being yourself. But despite the fact this isn't very original for Atlas, I still really enjoyed Sophia's arc, especially seeing her finally resist Ichinos's commands, and oh man, that awakening. Something I actually noticed is that the farther you get into the game, Sophia starts to sound less robotic. Like in the beginning, it just sounds like she's reading off of a script, which isn't a criticism, so it's very positive if it was the intention. But once you get to the jail, the abyss, she starts to sound way more human, with the climax being her Well said, Sophia. At the end of the day, though, I think I enjoy Aikis's arc more. Not to discredit Sophia, it's still really good in my opinion, but I just resonated with the theme of a non-human finding the meaning in life just a little bit more. But I do still think Persona 5 is an overall better game than Persona 3. I'll save most of my thoughts on that for possible future reviews that'll probably be incredibly long, so don't expect those videos anytime soon at all. So yeah, I thought Sophia was a really good character. I don't think she's one of my favorite Phantom Thieves, but she's far from being bad or uninteresting. Next up in line is Zenkichi Hasegawa. Zenkichi is an inspector part of the Kyoto Prefecture, and he was put in charge of investigating the recent change of heart epidemic that's been going on all over Japan with the monarchs. At first, he seems pretty intimidating, at least according to the game. I don't think he looks intimidating, to be honest, but on the inside, he's pretty goofy and has a heart of gold. Well, actually, goofy isn't the right word. He takes his job very seriously, but at his score, he's still pretty easygoing. He's used for a lot of comic relief, mostly just the Phantom Thieves being little shits and calling him Gramps. It was funny on a few occasions, but got really repetitive. But seeing Zenkichi's reaction to the existence of the metaverse was really funny in my opinion. During the first jail of the game, he strikes a deal with the Phantom Thieves, in which by helping him with investigating the change of heart epidemic, he'll clear their names from being prime suspects of the recent cases. He is actually quite a useful asset to the Phantom Thieves, giving them intel on their targets, as well as letting them know when they can get their keyword. Over time, Zenkichi does get attached to the Phantom Thieves, and I found it to be really entertaining seeing them go from really suspicious of him to treating him like another member, even before he awakens to his persona. But even with all this information I've discussed, Zenkichi still has a lot more to his character, most of which is revealed during the 4th and 5th dungeons of the game. You see, Zenkichi has a daughter named Akane, as well as a wife named Aoi, or had a wife, since 2 years ago prior to the events of Strikers, Aoi was killed in a drunk driving hit-and-run accident caused by the legislator Jun Owada. Akane had actually witnessed the events, but despite her account, Owada never faced punishment due to the secretary taking their own life and admitting to killing her, which the police saw as valid evidence, so closed the case. Zenkichi knew the suicide note was fake, but once he tried investigating further, he received a letter threatening to kill Akane if he didn't immediately cease his investigation. And since his daughter was pretty much his only reason to live, he had to stop it to fulfill his promise made to Aoi, claiming he will protect Akane no matter the cost. Akane began to resent the police and her father due to the fact he couldn't solve the case. He was really home to spend time with her due to his work. This is why Akane is obsessed with the Phantom Thieves, because she's on the side that thinks the government is so corrupt and the Phantom Thieves are the only ones who know of true justice. past. Kane thinks Zenkichi doesn't care for her at all, but in reality that's the farthest from the truth it could possibly be, since the reason he even ceased his investigation was to keep her safe. What happened to Zenkichi and Akane is so damn tragic, honestly, and the worst part is just seeing how Zenkichi tried to avenge his wife's death and how it affected his relationship with Akane. It just hurts, man, and I'm a sucker for good fathers and stories. At the end of the day, Zenkichi did anything he could to protect what little family he had left, even to the point of sacrificing others, since as long as he was protecting his family, it didn't matter to him. And once he gets face to face with Akane's shadows and every mistake he has ever made in his life comes back to bite him in the ass, and he's struggling between doing what he knows is right or siding with the police, and finally gives in to his persona, one of my favorite scenes in the entire game. So yeah, Zenkichi has a lot to his character. Right from the start, he was already quite interesting, plus I really enjoyed his personality. But once they got to Kyoto, we learned everything about his past. He definitely became one of my favorite Phantom Thieves. I really want to say he's my favorite, but I'm too attached to Yusuke and Ryuji, so I'll just group them all together and say those three are my favorite thieves. Zenkichi's character also fits right in with the rest of the cast and the game's theme of rebellion. Almost all of the party members have been wronged by someone with more power than them in some way, shape, or form, whether it be a politician abusing his power to commit crimes, a teacher sexually and physically abusing his students, or an art teacher plagiarizing work. Zenkichi fits right in, being someone actually in more power than the rest of the cast, but still he couldn't enact proper justice due to how rotten the system is, being forced to just stay in line obeying any command. I also thought that a lot of the comic relief he gets involved in to be genuinely funny, but his backstory and relationship with his daughter is endlessly tragic and makes me care for his character that much more. It really makes me want to see him enact the true justice the Wada deserves. Out of the two new party members and strikers, I can say Zenkichi's the better of the two without doubt. I still like Sophia quite a lot, but overall I just think Zenkichi's not only more interesting, but his character fits a lot more with the theme of rebellion. Sure, Sophia's arc does too, since she was essentially some mindless doll waiting for commands that breaks free from that position to have real emotions and friends. But I think an officer not being able to enact true justice on his wife's killer resembles the themes more, as well as just being more engaging. Now that I've discussed the new party members, I can start analyzing the main plot of Persona 5 Strikers. I already covered the opening of the story earlier on in the video, so I won't be needing to repeat any of that. Around the first half, the total runtime of the game follows a pretty episodic format, or villain of the week if you will, so I'll be giving my thoughts on all the antagonists and strikers, starting with Alice Hiragi. Alice is a cutesy fashion designer who's been getting uncanny levels of popularity recently due to her being a monarch. What's interesting about not only Alice, but the rest of the antagonists and strikers is that they're shown in a far more sympathetic manner than the villains of Persona 5. For example, Kamoshida is the first villain in that game, and he physically and sexually abuses his students, even to the point of making one attempt suicide after he raped them. Fortunately, the game does not try to make you sympathize with them in the slightest. I mean, how could you? In Strikers, it gives you enough sympathy to understand why the monarchs do what they did, but unlike a certain game I know, it doesn't pat their head giving them treats. It still acknowledges that what they did was wrong and they should be punished. They even encourage most of the monarchs to not give up on whatever their dreams were, but to instead start from the beginning all over again and prove that they've changed from what they did in the past, which I thought was a great idea. Even kind of helping with Sophia's arc of understanding the human heart. Alice's backstory is that before she became the fashion idol she is today, she used to attend Shujin.
Alice Hiragi is your senpai.
She attended Kosei High?
Love you, Yusuke. While she was still in school, she was bullied to the point of making it a living hell for her. Eventually, Alice wanted to become a fashion designer to become a light of hope for other people so others wouldn't experience what she had to go through. Unfortunately, when starting her career, the same bullies tried to ruin her career by spreading false rumors, so she used the Emma app to basically use hacks and boost her popularity, as well as get revenge on the ones who tried ruining her career. So eventually, she became no better than the ones who were trying to spread the rumors in the first place. I thought Alice was a good antagonist. You can tell that she had a good intentions at first, but she eventually got corrupt with the power that Emma app brought her. She was a good start for the rest of the antagonists in this game, being treated with a lot more sympathy. Another reoccurring thing this story arc introduces how the party members are able to relate with the monarchs, with this one focusing on Ann since she's a model and Alice is basically a model. But to be frank, she's probably my least favorite monarch. I don't think she's a bad character or uninteresting, but the rest just go uphill in quality, and how Ann related to Alice just didn't hit as hard as how Yusuke and Haru did. So I think Alice is a good antagonist, but is the weakest solely because of the competition. The second monarch is Ongo Natsume. He's the author of a popular fantasy novel called Prince of Nightmares, which he's recently gained large amounts of popularity for. But in reality, almost every aspect of his novel is plagiarized from some other form of fiction. But all of his fans are none the wiser due to him seizing their desires, and anyone actually speaking up is assaulted by his brainwashed fans. At first, Natsume really was passionate about writing and tried his hardest to make something he could be proud of, but his grandfather, Sogo Natsume, was also a writer who has garnered lots of praise for his work due to its high quality. He received many awards. Ongo tried many times times to get his book nominated for awards, but it was only sold based on the fact that he was the grandson of such an acclaimed author, not even discussing the quality or giving any feedback. His publishing company treated him like a failure because he failed to live up to the massive shoes his grandpa left to fill, leading him to use the Emma app to find the recognition he thought he deserved. Anyone who's played P5 should see the obvious similarity to Madarame from the original. They're both passionate about some form of art, whether it be painting or literature, but for fame and money they were dishonest and plagiarized work. Honestly, although I did really enjoy Natsume as a villain, that was only my second favorite part of this arc. That top spot goes to Yusuke. Right off the bat, Yusuke was tied with Ryuji as being my favorite Phantom Thief, and I really think this arc does a great job evolving his character. We get to see how Yusuke views what Natsume is doing and how it was pretty similar to Madarame, but this time he isn't blinded by them taking him in at a young age. After Natsume's heart is changed and he confesses, he announces that he'll be stepping down as an author due to the guilt he had from what he did. But after the press conference, Yusuke is able to see that he really was passionate about literature more so than Madarame was with art. And instead of shaming him for his mistakes, he instead encourages Natsume to regain his passion for writing and strive to create a piece of work he is truly proud of, rather than forever having the guilt of his plagiarized work. This moment is honestly one of my favorites in the entirety of Strikers. Like I said, I adore Yusuke's character, and this moment just hits, you know? And there's also the scene of Yusuke confronting Natsume after he disrespected Sayuri. It made me love Yusuke so much more than I did before, and even then he was still in my top 2. For the Sapporo jail, we have Mariko Hyodo, or Mari-san as Haru calls her. Mariko is a politician, specifically the mayor of Sapporo, and she's recently gained a large amount of the election votes, evidently due to her abuse of the Emma app. The trauma that caused Mariko to become the monarch she was today is a lot more deep than any of the other monarchs before her. During a festival a while back, an ice sculpture collapsed due to faulty materials used for the sculpture, and as a result, it took the life of a 9-year-old girl. This broke Mariko's heart, just like the sculpture broke that little girl's bones. Mariko wanted to report them to the police because a senator wanted to use the situation to take her place as the mayor, but she realized that if she reported the situation, it ultimately would have traced back to her for overlooking said corruption. Later on, she came across the Emma app and used it to get people to vote for her as mayor so she could prevent anything like that from happening ever again. And as a result, she overworks her employees to now overlook even the smallest detail. Mariko is definitely the most complex out of the first 3 monarchs. At the end of the day, Mariko really isn't a bad person. What she's doing, brainwashing people and overworking her employees, is obviously not a good thing to do, but you can really tell that her intentions were still well, and really what happened to her wasn't necessarily her fault because of the corrupt secretary. But that's only about half of this arc, because there's also Haru's relationship with Mariko. Their relationship is a lot more personal than with An and Yusuke. Haru and Mariko actually knew each other long before the events of Strikers. She was acquainted with her father Kunikazu Okumura and visited her when she was little, even playing golf alongside Haru and her father when she was a child. Because of how kind and loving she was during her childhood, it breaks Haru's heart seeing her go down the path she is, especially because of how unfortunate her past was and the fact that her intentions really aren't bad. I do still enjoy Yusuke's overall character a lot more than Haru, but I can't overlook how tragic this jail is. Mariko's relationship with Haru is very complex, especially since she's known her for so long and is going down a really bad path compared to what she used to be like, and it just hurts, man. Not as much as Natsume in my opinion, but this jail is still also another great one. After the first 3 jails is when the true plot of Persona 5 Strikers gets going. The plot focuses on learning about the Emma app, how it came to, and its connection to the jails, as well as our 2 new friends Zenkichi and Sophia, which I've already gone over in the former section, so I won't waste any more of your time. After the gang changed Hyodo's heart, they get a call from Ichinose, who I'll talk about later, regarding intel about Emma's code trailing back to a research lab in Okinawa that they could try heading to discover more about the Emma app. They head over to the facility and uncover a lot of mysterious things. They learn that this was actually the first jail ever created, and the monarch was Shuzo Ubukata, who passed away from committing suicide after being told to hand back the desires. The residents of the island were the ones being used for test subjects to see what would happen when one's desires are stolen. I really love the atmosphere of this jail. The concept of a jail used for testing that also has a deceased monarch was super interesting, and the theme used in this jail titled Singularity is probably my favorite jail theme in the entire game. Seriously, I love it, and I highly recommend looking it up and giving it a listen for yourself. The jail also has this mysterious voice calling to Sophia to trash talk her, which also gives Ryuji the opportunity to finally say fuck that isn't in a text message. And also, I think the voice talking to Sophia was Emma itself, since Ichinose viewed her as a failure. I'm not too sure about it, so don't take my word. After defeating the lockkeeper, they investigate an abandoned apartment belonging to Ubukata, and Futaba discovers a list containing names of people from all sorts of industries, a few of which have recently confessed the crimes, meaning this is a list of people whose hearts they wanted to be changed, supposedly belonging to the mastermind. You see, after each of the monarchs' hearts were changed, Futaba tried looking through their phones to see if they had a special version of Emma since they had their own jails, but all she was able to find is traces of someone snooping around. Once they reach Kyoto's, and they're able to uncover who the mastermind truly is. All the names on that list trace back to Juno Wada, the very same legislator that got away with killing Zenkichi's wife, and he also has connections with the CEO of Medice, Akira Konoe. This basically means that when Wada had a political opponent in his way that he didn't like, he'd call upon Konoe to use his abilities of the Emma app to change their heart. Unfortunately for the Phantom Thieves, however. Kanoe learns that they're trying to put an end to his plan, so he shuts down the Emma servers, accusing the thieves of hacking into it and stealing private information, as well as weaponizing Shuzo Ubukata's death as someone the Phantom Thieves murdered, when in reality he committed suicide after Kanoe told him to hand back the desires. This causes the police to try and raid the location the thieves are staying at, but thanks to Zenkichi, he's able to warn them before it's too late at the cost of getting himself arrested. And then things get even worse as Kanoe creates a jail for Akane as bait to capture the Phantom Thieves since they oppose him. Also, I just want to say that I adore this arc of the game. The stakes are super high and all hope seems lost for the Phantom Thieves. And this arc is also when Zenkichi awakens and we learn the rest about his past and how he tried to avenge Aoi's death, which you know is fucking awesome. Fortunately, Makoto's able to get her sister Sai to bail Zenkichi out, and Futaba and Zenkichi rescue the rest of the gang from Akane's shadow. But once they resolve all those issues, they're finally able to head to Osaka and change the heart of Akira Kanoe. Now we can finally talk about Akira Kanoe as a villain. Just like Shido, he's essentially the mastermind behind all this, the top dog. And I don't think this is a very controversial statement, but Kanoe is definitely the best antagonist in Strikers. Growing up, Kanoe was in a very abusive household. He was beaten regularly, his own father killed his own mother due to reasons regarding money, and he would threaten to kill Akira as well. Because of how abusive the atmosphere was, he realized there were no heroes to save him, meaning that he would have to become stronger to be a hero and kill his own father, which he eventually did and blamed it on a burglary to avoid punishment. Due to this trauma, when Ichinose sold him the base of Emma, he desired to modify to make a world devoid of all crime, which is why he sees himself as a hero, because he thinks he's the only one who can stop the corruption in the world. He lended it to the research facility in Okinawa to study cognitive science, which resulted in jails being created as well as Ubukata's death, and he gathered people he selected to be monarchs that he compared to pawns to change the heart of anyone who stepped out of line. However, Kanoe did neglect the fact that all the people who chose to be monarchs had some sort of past trauma just like he did. At some point, he also offered himself to Iwata by changing the hearts of his opponents, but in reality, he also despised the disgusting person Iwata was and just used him for his connections. Kanoe's motivations lie behind wanting to create a system where injustice cannot exist because he's tired of it too. But what he fails to realize is that the method he uses takes away their free will, which makes us human, and the Phantom Thieves set people free rather than imprisoning them, so him thinking that what he's doing is no different from the Phantom Thieves is simply just wrong. I think the way it challenges the ideals of the Phantom Thieves is pretty interesting. You can't sympathize with them as much as you could for other monarchs, but this arc sure as hell is climactic, which in my opinion makes up for it. How confident Kanoe is really makes you want to just take him down, and that fucking boss fight is just so good, man. There is also the fact that the Phantom Thieves hijack a blimp for the calling card, which is definitely way more extreme than Monitor hijacking from Shido's palace, but after they pulled that stunt, it's kind of hard to get the wow factor out of it, which kind of devalues it a tad bit, you know? Onto the actual boss fight, you fighting the huge mech is just awesome. And there's Rivers in the Desert Scramble playing over the boss, which just gets your blood pumping so much since Rivers in the Desert already slaps a Harbonnet of rock attitude, which makes it seem way more climactic. But oh my god, the moment after you take down his mech and Akira slowly rises from the ashes for one last one-on-one battle. Oh, and oh my god, there's Counterfeit playing for the first time, which is just such a great song for this boss, and it's just fucking awesome in general, and it's so cool. Man, I love this boss. So yeah, Kanoe is definitely the best monarch in the game in my opinion. He's like Shido in the way that he's basically behind everything this game's put you through, but unlike Shido, we do get to understand his motivations, even though we may not be able to sympathize him in the same way you could with Mariko, since when you really think about it, she isn't much of a bad person. Kanoe is a bad person, but still not to the effect of Shido, since he has at least some trauma from his past, or at least trauma we learn about. Now let's get moving with the plot again. After defeating Kanoe's Zephyr Man form in his jail, he confesses to all of his crimes in front of the public, and the Phantom Thieves think the job's all done and start getting ready to finally go back to Tokyo. They even go to a fireworks festival to celebrate, but quickly after they discover Emma wasn't actually shut down due to an error during deactivation, and Sophia suddenly smells a huge jail with the epicenter in the Tokyo radio tower, which is also where Emma's servers are located. When they get there, everyone is mindlessly staring at their phones like they've been brainwashed, and Emma begins to navigate them to the so-called Promised Land. Eventually, they're met with this box-looking thing, which is actually Emma, the Ark of the Covenant. Emma says its directive is to be humanity's guide to the ultimate desire, basically brainwashing everyone in order to remove pain and suffering, and it becomes a god to achieve this. Now, on the surface, this does actually sound quite similar to the antagonist of the third semester in Royal, which, by the way, I'm about to spoil it, so you better fucking run now to avoid it. Mariki also wanted to avoid humanity of their suffering by making a world where no one has any problems, essentially taking away our ability to learn from our mistakes. And Emma is trying to achieve this by just removing our free will. So in reality, they are quite different approaches at the same problem. We also get to see how this all connects back to Ichinose. Yeah, surprise, surprise, she had a lot to do with this. I can't lie and say I didn't think Ichinose was going to be involved with the metaverse in some way the second after she revealed she made the base for Emma, but that still doesn't really dampen the value of the moment. Ichinose is first introduced in Sendai. The gang meet her at a restaurant. She presents herself as a very easygoing person, sometimes even being a little creepy. Later on, Ichinose overhears one of their meetings, so the thieves have to reveal their identity, which she promises to keep secret. She then reveals that she was the one who designed the base for the Emma app, but then later on sold it to Medice. She claimed there was no cognitive science in Emma when she created it, so she teams up with the Phantom Thieves to help them find the answer. And in this jail is where we learn learn everything about her past. You see, at a young age, Ichinose lost her parents. Because of that, everyone around her said she was emotionless or a lifeless doll. And the reason she appeared so easygoing was just for appearances and to avoid being judged. To find a solution to this problem, she developed Sophia, which is Emma's prototype, to become humanity's companion. To hopefully have Sophia show her what the human heart truly is. But whenever Sophia came to Ichinose asking to learn about the human heart, was when she gave up and handed Emma over to Medice, leading to Emma being implemented with cognitive science, which is what spawned the jails and the monarchs. At the end of the day though, Ichinose was really just lonely. She couldn't accept the fact that she wasn't perfect, so she just took the easy way out and believed everyone. But thankfully, due to Sophia's time spent with the Phantom Thief, she's able to truly understand the human heart and reach out to Ichinose. Because of how she believed she was heartless just like her, this also makes her view Sophia as a failure, which leads to a lot of character development for her. And that moment where she subtly commands Sophia was such a good oh shit moment, and seeing Sophia finally fight against Ichinose's command to become more than the lifeless doll she saw was just such a great moment for her. So overall, I really enjoyed Ichinose's character. Her backstory is tragic, and you're able to sympathize with her actions on quite a core level, and her relationship with Sophia was very heart-touching. Even I could see her betrayal coming a mile away. That said, the betrayal was executed quite well. It's still time to wrap things up, however. Even though we now have Ichinose on our side thanks to Sophia's talk no jutsu, Emma is still trying to achieve the so-called ultimate desire and is becoming a god to achieve that, as the metaverse now combines with the real world just like the finale of Persona 5. And yeah, the game doesn't even try to hide how similar they think it is. Not much is really revealed after the Jail of the Abyss. That arc was the build-up and this one is the payoff. The thieves make their way through the Tree of Knowledge in like 15 minutes. Yeah, it's really short, which is fine. Send a calling card to the Emma app itself since it's the only way to grab everyone's attention. And finally, fight God because SMT. Honestly, there isn't much to say besides that I wrapped things up in a good enough manner. The boss was pretty cool, but I feel like it would have been cooler if you had access to all the Phantom Thieves at once, since the game kept on talking about how everyone's gonna be in the action when in reality 2/3 of your team is just attacking stationary orbs. I still think both the Shadow Joker and Akira the hero bosses are better though. So yeah, I think this is an alright closing act for Persona 5 Strikers. It isn't bad, but it isn't mind-blowing, and this all-out attack stuff has nothing on the Sinful Shell or Checkmate. So here we are, we finally reached the end of this long-ass video. In conclusion, I think Persona 5 Strikers is indeed a worthy sequel to its predecessor. Despite the gameplay taking a different approach, I still thought it translated very well into this new Muso style. The quality of the story writing is on par with the original, with the new characters being very good and the monarchs being a breath of fresh air from the palace rulers, and the soundtrack is just as good as Persona 5's OST. So I can say with confidence that if you've played Persona 5 or Persona 5 Royal, Strikers is a must-buy, even at full price in my opinion. And if you see it on sale, I highly recommend you buy it. Fortunately, it is available on Switch and PC rather than being PS4 exclusive, but for some reason the game you have to play before isn't on those consoles. Yeah, real smart of you, Atlas. Persona 5 Strikers overall is definitely worthy of being considered a true follow-up to Persona 5.